My name is Ian Chinich, and I'm a student at Boston University and member of Students for Justice in Palestine. This is the second event in our first Israel Apartheid Week at Boston University, and it is following on the heels of a successful film screening last night. There's going to be further announcements of other events that we're holding this week, and also some of the events other groups are holding this week as well, right before the Q&A. This week of focus on the treatment of Palestinians by the Israeli state comes at a precarious time for the indigenous people of the region. It has been a year since the mass destruction of Gaza by Israeli military forces using weapons provided by our tax dollars from the United States. Since that time, the blockade has continued, along with increasing settlement, housing evictions, and demolitions directed at displacing the Palestinian people from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The highlight of our week of action in Boston is tonight's event, and we are blessed to be joined by world-renowned intellectual Noam Chomsky as he addresses one of the most important issues of our time. Noam Chomsky is a prolific author and professor emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he has taught for over half a century. Among his many dozens of books are Rogue States, The Rule of Force in World Affairs, The New Military Humanism, Lessons from Kosovo, Fateful Triangle, The United States, Israel, and the Palestinians, and Manufacturing Consent. Professor Chomsky has been a champion of justice for decades, writing on the Middle East, Vietnam, Latin America, East Timor, and domestic U.S. policy. He is widely considered one of the most important historians and analysts on the issue of the Palestinian and U.S. involvement, and his works have not just educated an American generation, but touched people all over the world. The New York Times the New York Times Book Review has called him the most important intellectual alive. It is said that Howard Zinn opened the eyes of Americans to their own history and the history of social movements here. But of equal importance is the manner in which his friend and colleague Noam Chomsky has fundamentally changed the way Americans look at foreign policies of our own government. The issue of Palestine has been so tragically and inadequately recognized, and I do not think that anyone who is a student of the conflict and the issue can hope to study it without reading Professor Chomsky's work. You are all witnessing a historic event tonight at Boston University at a very historic time in the history of the movement for social justice in Palestine. Please join with me in recognizing Professor Noam Chomsky.
Thank you. Well, since this is Anti-Apartheid Week, I should say something about South Africa. Actually, it's a topic I haven't talked much about, but occasionally I have. One time I recall was in Israel 13 years ago. This was in 1997. I gave the keynote address at Ben Gurion University at a 30th anniversary conference dealing with the 1967 war. And perhaps I can just read a brief part of what I said there. I think it's still pertinent. And incidentally, it elicited no critical comment from the panel of Israeli scholars and well-known political figures who were the commentators at this talk, probably because it was so familiar and uncontroversial. So if you don't mind listening to something familiar and uncontroversial by Israeli standards, here it is. Here's what I said. I said, no one familiar with the situation in the territories created by the Rabin, Peres, Netanyahu governments and their predecessors will fail to recognize the picture given in a standard work of African history, which I then quoted from, and I'll quote now. South African retention of effective power through its officials in the Bantustans, its overwhelming economic influence and security arrangements give to this initiative of elections in the Bantustans elements of a farce. However unlikely candidates as were the Bantustans for any meaningful independent existence, their expanding bureaucracies provided jobs for new strata of educated Africans tied to the system in a new way, and a basis of accumulation for a small number of Africans with access to loans and political influence. Repression, too, could be indigenized through developing homeland policy and army personnel. On the fringe of the Bantustans, border industry growth centers were planned as a means of freeing capital from some of the restraints imposed on industrial expansion elsewhere, and to take advantage of virtually captive and particularly cheap labor. Within the homelands, economic development was more a matter of advertising brochures than actual practical activity, although some officials in South Africa understood the needs from their own perspective for some kind of revitalization of the homelands to prevent their economies from collapsing even further. Well, that's the end of the quote about South Africa. I'll continue with my own comments at the conference. So far, Israeli officials have not recognized any need to keep the economies of the cantons from collapsing even further, though sooner or later they may see the merits in the demands of Israeli industrialists, and now I'm quoting from a publication of Israeli industrialists, demand for a transition from colonialism to neocolonialism in the territories with the collaboration of representatives of the Palestinian bourgeoisie. Well, that's from that conference. 13 years later, it hasn't happened, though the Netanyahu government now may be veering in the direction of the of the Israeli industrialists who thought it might be a good time to move from straight colonialism to neocolonialism. The economies, however, in the cantons are still collapsing. Here's a quote from the latest World Bank report on the West Bank. Over time, the apparatus of Israeli control itself has gradually become more sophisticated and effective in its ability to interfere in and affect every aspect of Palestinian life, including job opportunities, work, and earnings. Extensive and multi-layered, the apparatus of control includes a permit system, physical obstacles known as closures, restricted roads, and prohibitions on entering large areas of land in the West Bank, and most notably the separation barrier, which we should actually think of as an annexation wall. It's turned the West Bank into a fragmented set of social and economic islands or enclaves cut off from one another. And Israel has finally begun to adopt the South African policy of what they called indigenization of repression. There's now several armies, in fact, one technically under the control of the State Department, run by General Keith Dayton, with the cooperation of the Jordanian dictatorship in Israel. There's another which is less known and allegedly much harsher, under the control of the CIA, so under no supervision, the General Intelligence and the Presidential Guard. And the Dayton Army, General Dayton Army, has won considerable praise from the Obama administration. Senator Kerry, who's our senator, is kind of the point man on international affairs for the Obama administration. In an important speech, he presented the standard party line, U.S. a neutral broker, trying to bring the two sides together, Israel yearning for a legitimate partner for peace, but it's never had one. And a couple of months ago, and he said, well, now it seems that Israel might have a legitimate partner for peace. And he referred to specifically to the very effective performance of the General Dayton Army during the attack on Gaza. It was feared that there would be some protests in the West Bank while Israel was slaughtering Palestinians in Gaza and destroying what was left of that miserable area.